In this video, I'll take a look at the basic languages involved in WordPress development and how we generally work with these languages, and try and show you what's ahead of you in your journey. So let's jump right into it and start with HTML and CSS. These are fundamental languages for the web. No matter what language you use, no matter what CMS you develop for, you are going to be writing HTML and CSS at some point. Now, modern languages sometimes abstract some of these away, so you may get to HTML later than if you would be learning development 10 years earlier. But at the end of the day, you do have to learn HTML and you do have to learn CSS to work properly on the web. So let's start with these right now. What I've done is I've created a folder on my desktop. You can create this anywhere. You can name it anything, and I've created a file in it which should be website.html. Again, you can name this anything. You can open this in your browser and you'll see a big fat nothing because it has no content in it. That's okay though. Let's change that right now and write something into it. So I've opened this file in a text editor. I use atom.io. I highly recommend it. It's a great editor for beginners and advanced users as well. So we can start adding some content here. Say my awesome WordPress article. There we go. If I go back to my browser and refresh, I can see that that text is right there. So far so good. Now how about if I want to add some paragraphs? Let's copy some out of here. So here are 2 paragraphs. Or actually, let's copy all of these. There we go. Alright, so now if I save that, it looks pretty good. And I go back to my website, it looks like that. So this is the essence basically of HTML. What we're doing with HTML is giving our document structure. We're putting in elements which tell browsers and humans alike what our content is, what type of elements it's segmented into. Let me give you an example. This will be a title. So we're going to need to make it a heading. We need to indicate to the browser that this is going to be a heading. So this is basic. We could actually say heading. This isn't valid code. But all HTML tags are basically like this. We just have conventions that we figured out over the years. So instead of saying heading, we say h1 and /h1. Now this, you'll see this pattern a lot. This here is called an HTML tag, this h1. And the way we write it is lower than sign, the tag, and greater than sign. Now if this is a closing tag, like for example this h1, which wraps around content, you'll need to close it with the closing tag, which is almost the same except it has a slash at the beginning. There we go. Now there are 6 levels of HTML headings, so you can go right down to 6. You can say this is a level 2 heading, this is a level 3 heading, and so on. Again, this depends on the structure of your document. So far so good. You should see the heading pop up, and your browser has some default styling, which is why it knows that it should be a bigger font, sorry, a bigger text. It should push the paragraph underneath and so on. So what about the paragraphs? We should indicate that these are paragraphs as well. As you can see, HTML does not preserve these line breaks, so it will just show everything together. But you can wrap these in paragraph tags, and again, this is a convention. We name paragraphs P. So we just say these are all paragraphs. The great thing about HTML is you can structure it any way you want to in the code. So you could do it this way as well, but this is a bit confusing. So what we tend to do is space it out so you can see what's what easily. Now if you go back here, you should see that this is a lot better. Now it's not great, but you can see that these are separate paragraphs and you can basically see what's going on. Alright, so now what happens if we want to add an image? Here's an image, for example. An image is a self-closing tag, which means that that's all you need to do. There's no /image, but you do need to give it some parameters. For example, where the image lives. Now you can actually, you should never do this, but you can do copy image address, and you can write src equals that image address. Now we should see that image. Now the reason you should never do this is called hot linking, and basically I'm using WPMU dev servers to serve my images. This is not nice because basically you're stealing someone else's bandwidth, because whenever someone views this image on your website, the image is actually coming from the other website, in this case WPMU Dev. So we're basically using their servers for our bandwidth. This is not nice. You should save the image if the image's license allows you to. You should save it on your own servers and serve it from there. But I think WPMU Dev will allow me this small transgression. So there we have an image. Again, not super beautiful, but we're getting there. So there are a lot more elements. For example, this could be a heading, another heading. So after the image, we could have a level 2 heading. And then we can take a look at how this looks. And you can see it's slightly smaller than the H1, but it's still very obviously a heading. Then we could copy paste these things. And as you can see, we're getting some more elements here because this line is all bold, and there's also some bold text in here. So how do we handle that? Again, we use tags. So first of all, this is a paragraph. Now this is all bold. So what I would do here is this is still a paragraph, and so is this. To create bold text, you can use the tag strong. So we can make this whole thing strong. Again, just wrap any text you want to make bold in here strong. And the core, I think it was core. Oops. There we are. So what we should see is those text bits become strong. There we go. You can see that it's very obviously different font weight. So that is basically HTML. There are lots and lots of elements. So you could go to W3 schools. I cannot type. Never mind. Schools HTML. Take a look at this HTML tutorial. And I also like to use, I think it's HTML doctor element list or something like that, element index. And you can see all the elements that HTML has. Now you don't have to use all of them, and I don't use all of them for sure. But there are quite some nice ones, like block quote is something you would use for quotes. For example, if you want to quote someone, you can, and let's say here's a quote. I don't think this article contains any quotes, but let's presume that this is a quote. And instead of wrapping it in a paragraph tag, you can use block quote. Now this might, I don't know how this looks by default, but it might not look different from the paragraph text. It does, it looks a bit different because it's pulled in slightly from the left. But what you should be aware of is that this is actually a default style sheet, and now we're getting into CSS, that your browser has. What many people do in the beginning of their projects is they actually remove all this default styling, and the reason being is that different browsers have different default stylings. So in order to create a uniform base, you just remove all the styles and then you build it up yourself. So before we get into that, actually we probably won't get into that in this, but let me give you some examples of CSS. So what you use HTML for, as you can see, is structure. I never told HTML to make this slightly larger and to make it, a different font or make it bold or anything. So it contains no style information. Now don't be confused with the strong tag. This doesn't actually mean make this text bold. What it means is that this text is more important in the context here. So it's something that we should put some emphasis on. It's something you want to underline as a main point of the paragraph or a main point in your text. So so you're not actually making it bold. It's default styling of the browser that's making it bold, because it's a convention that whatever is important will just make bold. So, but keep in mind that HTML does not contain any styling information on its own. It's your browser that's doing all the work there. So, to make this valid HTML, this is valid HTML, but to make it a valid website, we need to add some stuff to the top. First of all, we need to say doc type HTML. This is a convention. It just tells the browser that this is an HTML document. Then we need to add an HTML tag. We wrap everything in HTML. If you want, you can structure this by highlighting everything and just moving everything to the right. So you can press tab on Windows or command, I think it's command, right curly braces on the Mac. Then we have an element which is called the head. this contains meta information about the web page. For example, I think the only required thing here is title, which should be my example website. And you can see this title inside the tab here. So this is what you're changing here. Then the content of your website is called the body. So everything that the user can see is actually in the body. Actually see within your content actually, because you can see the title in the tab. There we go. So this is now a valid HTML document, hopefully. You can actually check by copy pasting all the code of a website and going to HTML validator and validating your markup. You can just paste it here. You can also paste the URL of your website, but mine is local, so that won't work. There we go. There is an error, yes. See, this is why this is a very useful tool. Each image element must have an alt attribute. You can look at the link to see what that means, or you can actually wait for me to explain. An alt text will be shown if the image cannot be loaded, and it's also useful for people who have screen readers who are visually impaired, because the screen reader will read this aloud. So we can say, what is this actually? It's a screenshot from WordPress.org. Screenshot from WordPress.org. There we go. You won't see any difference, but this information is now embedded in your website. You can check out how this looks. Let's just make an error in the URL. There we go. So this is how it looks if the image can't be loaded. There we go. So this should now be a valid HTML website. Now don't fret too much about validating your code. It's important, sure, but you know, on your first go, it won't take precedence over other things like actually being able to write code. So don't worry about it if it's not valid. You know, try and make it valid, and you know, try and make your first website valid as well. But it's not the end of the world if your website is not valid HTML. Don't worry about it. All right, so now we're through with HTML. Let's look at some CSS. Now, there are a few ways to add CSS code. Let's start with the best one first. And actually, yes. So the way you can add CSS is, well, actually, let me explain all three. There are quite a few. One way you can add CSS is just add it inline here. This is not a good idea. It's not good practice. It makes your code all over the place. So I would advise against doing this, except for like quick tests. So you use a style attribute and you give it a value. Let's say, this will be very easy, let's say background red. So the way you give styles is you add a property, you add a semicolon, or actually that's a colon, isn't it? You add a colon, and then you type a value, background red, and you can add multiple properties. You could say that I also want to make the text color white. So you separate these property and value pairs with semicolons now, and you say color white. There we go. Now let's remove that because it's very ugly. So that's one way you can add styles, but this isn't really the way you should add styles. Another way to add styles is to add them here using a style tag. I haven't done this in a while, so hopefully this is how you do it. I think you may need to type text/CSS. I never really do this. So you can also say, and this is basically how CSS will be written from now on, or how you will write CSS from now on. Since you're not writing inline styles, you need to tell CSS what element you're styling. So you need to say, I am going to style the H1 element, and then wrap all your code in curly braces. And now you can start with the background red. Let's give it a different value just so we can see. Yellow and color green. That will be sufficiently ugly. There we go. It's not even that bad. All right, so the important bit here is that you need to declare what you're styling. So I could also say each paragraph text should have a color of red. Now note that this will actually mean that all paragraphs have a color of red. So if you want to make sure that only one paragraph or a specific paragraph has a different color, you can do two things. You can say paragraph style color blue. Now this one will be blue, but all the others will be red. Why? CSS is called cascading style sheets, and this is the cascading part that you're seeing. There are, as I mentioned, there are 3 ways to add style sheets. The third way, before I get into cascading, is actually linking them externally. So for example, this will be almost the same. You have to say link ref style.css. You can also type equals text/CSS, and that's it. You need to create a new file, style.css, and then give it some styles. So let's copy all of this into this file. So basically you're just doing this in an external file. This is a lot better. Something is not working here. Link style.css. It should. Should work. I don't think it's the rel style sheet which is missing. Style.css. So there we go. It was the rel. That's odd. Okay, so as you can see, this is a really good example of how even people who have been developing for a while can get mixed up in things. It's very rare for me nowadays to actually add this line manually, because in WordPress you enqueue your style sheets in a different way. The end result will be this, but it's WordPress generating this line, not myself. But that's okay. You're not a good developer because you know everything off the top of your head. You're a good developer because you know where to look, and you can use the things that you use every day very well. So don't worry if you don't know stuff. I'm not worrying about not knowing stuff. Just look it up on the internet. Let's get back to why this thing is now blue. Okay, so what's happening here is that CSS cascades down. There are 3 ways you can add CSS: an external file, here within this this style block, and inline. Now the way it takes precedence is first WordPress looks at the external file and looks at the rules here. So it sees that all paragraphs are red. Awesome. Then it looks if there are any styles here in style blocks. There are none. And then it looks at the inline styles. So for this paragraph, it sees that it should be red, but then this overwrites it to make it blue. For all the other paragraphs, there are no overwriting rules, so they just remain red. So what would happen if I would add P color green in here? Now what should happen is we take a look here. So all paragraphs are red, but this, it overwrites that rule and makes them all green. Now this rule still overwrites everything else, so this first paragraph will be blue, all others will be green. There we go. Now let's remove all that because this is getting very ugly now. But basically this is the essence of CSS. So what you do is you write an element here, you add some curly braces, you write properties here, and you write values here, and you separate these properties and values with semicolons. I can't type while I'm writing, sorry. No, I can't type while I'm speaking, sorry. There we are. So this is the essence of CSS. It's all you do. Again, what you need to do is go and look at a CSS tutorial. You can check out how you can work with colors, backgrounds, borders, margins, paddings, blah blah blah, all that. So one quick example of what I would do. First of all, I would reset all these styles, but let's not get into that. But what I could do, for example, is just say I would like my body to be width of 800 pixels and a margin of 0 auto. What this will do is it will center the whole thing. There we go. I would like my image to be a width of 100% because that pertains to its parent, which is this wide exactly. There we go. You'll learn all these when you're reading the CSS. So if you don't understand why these work exactly, don't worry about it. This is just an example. You could change the font to font family. I actually have this font installed, so this might not work for you, but this is a Google font and it's freely available. There we go. We could say that we have a line height of 1.8. There we go. and paragraphs should have a margin bottom of 1.8 ems. Again, don't worry about it. You'll learn all this stuff. There you go. It's much better. Now we can do some more fancy things, like for example, we can say block quote. This won't be that fancy. Has a border left of let's say E1. This is called a hex code. It's just a way of writing a color. Again, this will be in the tutorial. It's basically a shade of gray, the one I've added. Solid, and let's make it 5 pixels. There we go. Let's remove all margins. Well, I wonder if it's a margin or a padding. 0 pixels. Perfect. And let's give it a padding left 22 pixels. There we go. So you can do all these things pretty easily. Again, there are some things like the colors and margins and paddings. These are all really easy. So you just need to read how they work, and then you need to practice a lot. There will be a lot of things which will weigh you down when you're doing CSS, especially when you're doing positioning like floating and things like that. But don't worry too much about it. There are great resources on the web to learn these kinds of things now, and HTML and CSS should be the first thing you learn, and it should be probably the easiest thing you learn. Although CSS might take a while to master. They're all easy to learn but difficult to master, and CSS is a pretty good example of that. Okay, so let's jump right into PHP as well. So PHP is different from HTML because it is a server-side language. What that means is that the way HTML works is that my computer requests a file from your computer, you send me website.html, I read that file, and we're done. Server-side languages work a bit differently. When I request something from the server, like for example the opening page of a website, instead of sending me a file first, you actually process a file on the server, generate an HTML file from it, and send me the result. So why is this important? When you have a server to process stuff, you can do a lot more things. Like for example, if I'm here in HTML, what I can do is instead of this title, let's say hello Daniel. That's fine. But what about greeting someone with the correct time of day? So for example, good morning Daniel. But if it's not morning, then what do you do? How do you make sure that this depends on the time? Now in PHP you can do that, and you can do a lot of different cool things. To show you, however, I'm going to have to make sure that this is all running on a server. I won't go into how to do that just now, but we do have resources on WPMU Dev. So if you type in WPMU Dev Vagrant, I'm sure you'll get what you need. Using Vagrant to set up a WordPress test environment, that will be just fine. So if you follow that, you'll be able to set up a PHP development environment. Now what I'll do is I'll just copy this folder into my websites folder, sites, HTML. There we go. I already have one here, but let's replace it. There we go. So now I can go to there we go, 1.1, and I can go to sites. No, it's not sites, sorry, it's websites. There we go. Hopefully it will work. Oh, it won't work because my server is not running. So don't get too stressed out about this. I think it's sites. There we go. As you can see, this is basically all you need to do. It's not very difficult. You can just copy paste in these commands. You basically need to know 2 commands in the terminal to make all your PHP stuff work. It's all explained in the article. So once the server is running, there we go. This still won't work, but don't worry about it too much. I can go to website. I think it was website. Now let's wait for this to resolve. What we need to do is make this index.html and make sure it's website. Yes, there we go. Now, there we go. So this is now working with PHP. Now this is just an HTML file, so that's PHP is just sending me this HTML file back. But if you rename it PHP, this will now be a PHP file. Yes, please. So there's no difference right now, because the way PHP works is anything which is not inside PHP tags. Now don't confuse PHP tags with HTML tags, so this is not a PHP tag. Anything that is not inside PHP tags will be just interpreted as HTML. So since there are no PHP tags, it's just all sent as HTML. Everything is fine. Now a PHP tag looks like this. This has nothing to do with HTML. It's the way PHP works. Now I'm not editing the correct file, so let's resolve that issue and drop this file, this folder into Atom. There we go. Right. So, a PHP tag looks like this. There we go. Now anything inside that will be interpreted as PHP. Now, I won't get into the code syntax a lot, but what I will do is show you some quick examples. So, if you type echo, good morning, Daniel, this will just basically output this as HTML. So right now you won't see any difference. There we go. However, what you could do is, let me give you a quick example. Is use some functions to determine whether it's morning or whether it's evening. Okay, so let's get started with that. Here are the PHP tags. And I like to work from the other way around sometimes, especially when showing beginners how PHP works. There is one thing you need to know about PHP before we begin. There are things called variables. For example, name equals Daniel. So I've created a variable which is called name, and I've assigned it the value of Daniel. So now instead of echoing good morning Daniel, I will echo good morning, and I will add to the string anything which is in the name variable. So this should be good morning Daniel. There we go. Now if I change this to good morning Bob, sorry, if I change it to Bob, it will be good morning Bob. Now the advantage of this is probably not immediately obvious. Just one quick advantage without going into the details is if I use the name a lot of times on the web page, for example here and here and here and here, if I decide to change the name, I don't need to change it in all the 5 places, I just change it here. So I could actually say this is the first post from echo name in our 5-part series. So that would be, this is the first post from Bob in our 5-part series. Now for this series, Bob says it's important that you already have a thorough understanding of blah blah blah. So we have Bob here, we have Bob here, and we have Bob here. Now if I change this to Daniel here, it will all magically change to Daniel. So this is just one advantage. There are a lot more advantages to this, but this is just one quickly apparent one. So now how can we say good morning Daniel and just say good evening if it's the evening? Now the way I would do it, the way I did it when I started learning, is there's a function in PHP called date. So let's look at date PHP. And I just look at the description of this function and how it works and try and figure some stuff out. So obviously you should read a PHP tutorial first, a basic one, because you need to understand how to write a function. So for example, if you write date, echo date y, that will give you the current year. So for example, am I editing the wrong file again? Oh, look at that, I don't know how PHP works. String format timestamp. Oh, that should be fine. Oh, look at that, I'm looking at the wrong web page. It's this one. There we go. So it's 2016. The other one was just our HTML version, which hasn't changed. Now, as you can see, we're now getting some errors. This is fine. It says undefined variable name. We're using the name variable, and I have actually deleted that name variable. So let's just do that again. There we go. So now we're getting 2016. Now if you take a look at the documentation of what code to use for what data, you can see that there are hour data. There's hour data here, time, 12-hour format, 24-hour format, G, 0 through 23, 12 hour, there we go, this will be fine. So if I type G, this should give us the current hour. The current hour is 9, that's correct. So what we could do is, let's say, if the current hour is, let's say, higher than 14, or let's say higher than 18, which would be 6 p.m., we would say good evening. So we could do that with PHP. We could also store this same time. These are not great variable names, but they'll do. And then we can use an if statement to check our time. So if the time is greater than 18, then we would say, let's create a new variable called, actually let's create it here. Let's say this new variable is greeting, and we'd say good day. So this would be our basic greeting. If the time is greater than 18, our greeting would be, actually, instead, it would be good evening. Else, if, in other cases, if the time, well actually we can just say else. No, else if time is smaller than, let's say, 10, then the greeting would be good morning. So what PHP would do is see that we have a greeting variable and it's called good day. It will then check if the time is greater than 18. If it is, the greeting would become good evening. If it isn't greater than 18 and it's smaller than 10, then it would say good morning. If none of these cases are true, none of these lines actually happen, so our greeting would say stay good day. So all we have left is to delete this and type greeting and then prepend my name to it. Actually, we can even, let's prepend just a space and then just type name. So this would be good morning, space, and name. So Daniel. Sorry about that. There we go. Oh, look at that. We have an unexpected greeting on line 15. You'll get a lot of these when you're writing PHP. This probably means that I forgot a semicolon. So line 15, yes. Each line should end in a semicolon. If you forget, you'll get an unexpected error. So there we go, we have good morning, Daniel. Now, if I actually change this manually, so here I'm detecting the time, but I can change this manually and just say time equals 19. And that would mean it's the evening. So good evening, Daniel. All right, so this is basically how PHP works. How WordPress uses it like this as well, but there are a lot of different things that WordPress does. For example, what you can see, I won't be able to show you this right now, but you'll figure, or it will be in later parts. Let's just go back to no PHP here. My awesome title. So we need to delete these because we don't have the name defined anymore. There we go. So we went back to our HTML. Now, you'll note that your WordPress blog has maybe 500 posts or 800 posts. Now you don't have a separate PHP file for each one. That would be very wasteful. And if you have a header, you'd need to change that in all your files. This is basically why PHP was developed. So if I have a header or a sidebar, I don't want to change that in 1,000 files if I have 1,000 posts. So what WordPress does and what PHP allows WordPress to do is to use functions instead. So basically, instead of having the title of an article here, what WordPress does, now this won't be actual code, is post, get me the post. And WordPress looks at the URL, it figures out what posts you're on, and basically this function knows what post to retrieve on the specific page. Don't worry about how that works. The point is that this post variable will now have data about the current post. And then WordPress just uses functions like the title. So instead of writing a specific title, it says, whatever page I'm on, get me the title of that page. Instead of all this, it actually just says, all of this, it just says the content. So get me the content of whatever post I'm on. As you can see, this makes this a lot shorter, and it makes it a lot more modular. So basically, this is how you can get away with creating a couple of files for a theme, and then it would all work. So that's the basics of PHP. Another language that will crop up very quickly is JavaScript. And JavaScript is getting more and more attention these days. There will be a lot more themes, there will be a lot more applications written in JavaScript. In WordPress, it's been customary to use Jquery for many JavaScript needs, and that it won't be phased out, but the themes and the larger applications will be written in things like React and Angular and so on. These are a bit more complex, don't worry about them for now, but it's a good idea to learn classic proper JavaScript. I'll be showing you examples with Jquery. Jquery is written in JavaScript. It's a JavaScript framework, but it's a very good idea to learn vanilla JavaScript properly. You can do that with tutorials just like the HTML and CSS. If you go to W3 Schools, this is a good primer, and then you can get into proper JavaScript later on. What I'll show you is a quick Jquery tutorial, or not even tutorial, but to basically show the essence of what Jquery is. So I'll just copy Jquery into here, and I'll add it to my website. The way I added a script type equals text / JavaScript src equals jquery.js / script. There we go. So you won't see any difference, but Jquery has now been loaded on my site, so I can start using it. It's a good idea to add as much of your JavaScript as possible at the end of your page. So it will be script type text JavaScript, and then I can start adding some JavaScript here. So let's do some Jquery stuff. For example, I'll just show you one quick example of what Jquery can do. For example, Jquery block quote. I'll target all block quotes on click. Hold on, this is older. Let's use document on click block quote. There we go. Function Jquery. Oops. This will not make sense, by the way, but it's an example nonetheless. CSS background red. There we go. Hopefully this will work. So, boom, there we go. So this gave us some interactivity, some really bad interactivity, but nevertheless, whenever I click on a block here, a block quote here, all P's will be red, and it works. Obviously, this is not really how it is used, or at least this specific example won't be used a lot. But what happened here is this is called an event. Whenever I click on a block quote, I want all P tags to have an additional CSS property and value, which would be background in red. Again, not super useful, but this is basically what Jquery and what JavaScript is about on this level. And you can do a lot of cool things. Like, for example, you can have boxes which just have a title, and if you click on the title, they would drop down. So for example, I can actually show you that. So here, let's create a title. This is a drop down box. We could say div class. We'll give it a class so we can target it. Drop down. This would be the title of the drop down box, and then there's some content. This is the content of the box. Okay, so now with CSS, let's just make some stuff happen here. Let's go to our CSS file and let's add some code. Drop down, background, let's make it F5, F5, F5. There we go, and it didn't work. Probably mistyped something here. Drop down, oh, there we go. There we go. So now it should be gray. There we go. So you can see that it's a bit gray. Let's give it some padding. And also what we want to do is drop down. This drop down has a drop down content. So let's hide that. Display none. There we go. So this is a drop down box. Now when you click the box, I could add some elements here like a drop down arrow and things like that. But the point is, when I click this box, I want this whole thing to pop down. Also, let's give it a margin bottom of 1.8m, just like all other elements. There we go, to make it standardized. Now here I could say that whenever I click on the drop down, then take a look. So this element, the drop down that I actually clicked on, I think it's find, and it was drop down content, and let's say toggle. So when I click on this box, the content is there. If I click on it again, it's toggled. And I can do things like, I think it's slide toggle, where it would slide down, slide up. So these are the kind of interactions that you can do with JavaScript. There's a lot more. You can do Ajax calls and things like that, which are a bit more in the future. But it gives you a good opportunity to add good interaction. When you first start with JavaScript, this seems like a really good idea, this little animation thing. Usually it's not. It gets really, really boring waiting for the animation to finish. You can add touches like make it a lot faster and so on. Try not to go overboard with animations. But these, they can be really useful, and that you can make a really good user experience with the help of JavaScript. You can also make a really bad one, but you can make a really good one. So that's basically it for JavaScript. Again, I recommend reading through the primer first. And that should conclude all the main languages. I did also talk about MySQL in the article. This won't really be needed for the first couple of months for sure, so I decided not to go into that. And there are some other tools that you can use, but basically what I would recommend right now is to sit down and start learning HTML and CSS and to start practicing. You don't need your PHP, the Apache server for it. You can just start typing it anywhere. You can use it on basically any device that you have. It's a really easy thing to get into. Spend a lot of time learning why you use specific tags, so why this is a P tag, why this is a block quote tag, what a div is and what a span is and what all the other tags are. And then spend time practicing CSS, because CSS, again, as I said, it's very easy to learn and very difficult to master. So spend time practicing. There is no substitute for practicing stuff. As you can see, I haven't practiced putting this link thing in, so I couldn't even remember how to actually do it properly, even though it's one of the most basic things. Again, I do it non-manually these days, but still, this just shows how important practicing really is. And you do need to learn these things, I think, manually before you can start automating it and start using tools like WordPress. For now, again, I recommend getting into HTML and CSS, and then when you're comfortable, moving on to PHP, and when you're comfortable with that, start doing some proper WordPress development.